Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Um, I'm Ilse Wolff, co-director of Wolff Architects, and I'm very pleased to introduce the second day of the Wolff Architects Winter School that has been facilitated by the National Arts Festival. And with that, we'd like to also just take the opportunity to thank the National Arts Festival for facilitating our very first, foray into organizing winter schools. We are humble architects trying to make buildings and, trying to just create awareness and create a public culture around architecture. So the winter school really developed around an idea that we had that is facilitated around this particular image, which I'll share in now. Um, can everybody see? Can you see that image? So the image on the screen is an image of a woman called Katrina Majid, who's constructing a house in a place called Sundrift in the Northern Cape. And the image was captured by a photographer called Paul Grendon in 1991. That means that this house, which is incomplete at the moment, still in this image, would have been 30 years old today. Our winter school pays homage to the construction because it links to another idea that we came across by the poet Fred Moten, who said that the only thing that we should really be studying is how to renew our habits of assembly. So the idea of around renewing our habits of assembly is, in Moten's case, an idea around assembling people, ideas, collective freedoms. But in the case of Katrina Majid, I also see an opportunity to think about architecture and the way we actually make buildings as a way of renewing our habits of making buildings and making spaces. The way Katrina is showing us to construct is not in the traditional way that we've been thinking about it, which is this kind of abstract notion of making a imagined empty space and then filling it afterwards. But the way Katrina is constructing it in this image talks about the fact that she's already gathered all her belongings, and in some cases, in this case, also one of her family members who you can see in the picture already inside the building that she's constructing. So what I'm really asking is, how can we construct new architectures that imagines the pre-existing or the existing already there and construct around that through how we imagine spaces and not the other way around where we imagine it as an empty space. Very simple idea, but then becomes this kind of opening to think about architecture differently. So yesterday we had Ola Hassanein, who hails from Khartoum in Sudan, talking about revolution and political action and ideas around the three tiers of her way of thinking and analyzing space in Khartoum, and how this idea of studying the shadows that are cast by institutional spaces become spaces where new openings for um, for ways of being and for ways, particularly for marginalized women in Khartoum, becomes a space of potential. Today we have a very special guest, which I would like to introduce now. His name is Athi Ruga, who is an artist and visual artist and thinker, and somebody who I have been following for a very long time, whose work I admire, and who's here to share some work on a project called The Victory of the Word, which was co-founded by himself and Anelisa Mangcu. Founded during the national lockdown in 2020, the Victory of the Word is an artist-run development platform inspired by the 200-year legacy of Lovedale Press, and we are committed to serving independent artists. I'm speaking in the voice of Athi here, and the preservation of language, both visual and written. Their first project outside of the Lovedale project was the Bodyland Residency hosted in the Eastern Cape. The University of Fort Hare's Hunterstown Center, funded by the National Institute of the Humanities and Social Sciences in association with Victory of the Word, proudly hosted 8 young artists in the idyllic Amatole village of Hogsback, South Africa, from October to November 2020. The 8 artists are in production under the mentorship of Bodyland directors Athi, Patra, Ruga for a group exhibition in spring, summer 2021-2022. During this conversation, Athi will introduce the audience to the story of how the legacy of the Lovedale Press can be embodied in new and interesting ways as a valid avenue to the preservation of language. Um, just a little bit of homework before I hand the mic over to Ati, which I'm very happy that you could join us and to speak through the project, is that I would obviously welcome everybody to this forum to engage in this conversation. We very much want it to be conversational. So please, if you have questions, either put it in the chat or participate as part of this conversation. Over to you, Ati, and welcome.
Hi, Ilza, and hi, everyone. Hello. Can you hear me? That's the famous words in 2020, 21. Kemi, can you hear me?
That one, and are you on,
All right.
you on mute?
You're on mute, yes. Hi, let me introduce myself. My name is Athi Patra. I am a visual artist who works in the Eastern Cape, in Hogsback, in the Kume Valley, in the land of Amangcu. And I'm saying that because I would like to acknowledge the land in which our bodies exist in. I was thinking how I would like to start this conversation or this exposition by me is to just ask you if you do know of any African language presses, just 3 of them at the top of your head in South Africa. And I will not wait. I will just see if it actually comes up over and over and over again, because that's very important for this conversation. From the middle of the 1800s up until now, South Africa, Black South Africa, Xhosa South Africa, Tswana South Africa, all of Black South Africa has been able to work with forces that were imposed upon us, i.e. in the colonialist sense, to somehow liberate ourselves through the written word. I come here representing one half of Victory of the Word. And Victory of the Word takes inspiration from the Lovedale Press in its many iterations that was founded in 1823 in the Kume Valley, which is just down the mountain, in the mountain. It begins in the mountain and goes down towards Alice and incorporates these places. So in 1823, this man came and wanted to put a printing press to print the Bible in the middle of the Nika people. He was made to wait for 6 months outside, and then he went on to have another year's conversation with actually bring in the print, which would come from the East London port and go up the Buffalo River into the Amatole Mountains, where basically our story lives today. So within this valley, the Lovedale Press, where the words Zonke Ingoma zezikaThixo, which would be the first Xhosa words ever printed, it is argued, would then fall into other wars would be victorious, or rather this Xhosa word would be victorious over the frontier wars, or what I call the Xhosa Wars of Dispossession. Also at the same time, they would go through apartheid, missionary restrictions. And also now their new victory is that of winning post 94 or post Fees Must Fall or post the textbook crisis or the neglect of the African language in textbooks which are given to schools and the quality of such. Why Lovedale? 3 years ago, I went looking. I started a work called the Lunar Songbook, which was basically me finding old stories that I was taught that I wanted to flip back, because in the books that I was reading, like P. Miller or Barbara Tyrrell, these stories had a very, very, very a way that was not satisfactory to my existence, my artistic existence. They were written by people who actually did not live on ground level with people. They were always on some kind of geographic or status hierarchy. But when we arrived at the Lovedale Press, we thought that we'd arrive at a place that is quite glittering and is proud of its heritage. However, the first time I arrived there, it was closed. So I did research as to how I can get in, and I made an appointment to meet 3 gentlemen who I've gone on to have a very, very wonderful relationship with. And the story of Lovedale is the story of these 3 people. I would like to invoke Ubulelwa Batyoti. I would like to invoke Ubudcebo Ntaka. I would like to invoke Ubabu Bishop. And they have been working there. They started out as 8 people. And then they bought the place from the missionaries, the Glasgow Missionary Society, which also was working with the Presbyterians in publishing this 200-year publishing history. So they decided, as with many things post-94, to basically duck. They left and sold the play. They put it up on auction, at which these 8 people who were not trained to be managers, who were not trained to be entrepreneurs, or how to handle the legacy of Lovedale when it left, then decided to pitch up their pension monies together and buy Lovedale Press. This is in 2001. 2001, they start having struggles, and also it not being passed down properly from those who had kept it for 200 years. They were only being used as printers, bookbinders. And when it was writing, of course, there's a whole litany of history of how, especially a man called James Stewart, one of the most influential people in Lovedale Press, did suppress some really revolutionary thought. Lovedale Press is, as I've been saying, a press. It has seen, in 2023, it will be 200 years of printing. I could break down its many phases in the following way. There was the beginning, which was the negotiations with the people to build the actual building. The building was not built by those who came; it was built by those who actually did live among the Ngqika and Ngqika natives. I'd like to say that word. It starts with that, and then it moves on to the process of pioneers, the Jabavus, the Sogas, who actually put in words and put that they had learned over time and the research that they got out in academia. This is also a time where we start seeing women writers in the 20s. I'd like to invoke Nontsizi Mgqwetho. And it is in these stories and in my artwork I'm picking and all of that, to an extent that, yeah, the history of it, how it can still be made something that is new, is in total contradiction, a shameful contradiction actually, to the actual venue as it stands right now. Lovedale Press doesn't have sales points. Lovedale Press doesn't have a digital inventory of the works that are contained inside. After the printers stopped working and were not able to be fixed, there is books that are archival, some are contemporary, yet at the same time modern classics that need to still be out there. And actually this week I am here to pick up some books so that we can actually, Victory of the Word can do an e-shop whereby people can be able to get limited editions of the remaining books that will never come out of the prints again, unless an extraordinary circumstance happens in these following solutions. Well, the first thing you can do is donate to keep the people at Lovedale working and to keep them strong, to keep the doors open so that they can disseminate the in Lovedale. Another thing you can do is walk in. Go see the space, go embody what is happening in the space, because you'll see the past, the present, and the potential of a very amazing future when you actually breathe in the space. The third one is to collect books that are written in African languages, because they've taken a beating probably even before they bought a Lovedale Press. I would say 2008 was truly a point whereby media got its first big punch. Printed media went and got a punch to the gut, whereby blogging came up and became more digitized. We moved towards a more digitized era. 2012 sees quite a catastrophic crisis in South Africa in the form of the textbook crisis, whereby for close to a year, books were not delivered to schools, and the quality of which, of course, I wouldn't know. And this results in a big gap of the mother tongue, of them getting orders for that year. And slowdown in that did punch them in the gut. We then move on to the fact that SAB publishing and showing, because most of the books that were published Minyanya, Wazidenge, were made into films for TV1, which is basically CCTV or Simunye. And these involved people of the Eastern Cape to act them. They were acted in local spaces. So there's this bodyland embodiment of the books that already is maybe how I got to know about them and want to have influenced me and the people who are actually close to the ecosystem of Victory of the Word. Yeah, we get the crash of the COVID crisis as well, which then leads us to the point whereby we cannot cry anymore. We are seeing something going again. And this is when the Sokosiabe, Anelisa, Mangcu, and I came together and we formed the Victory of the Word. If that was not the longest intro in history, I don't know what is, but I really wanted to draw it out in a way that is visual to you. If you have any questions, please, you can just put them through as we're speaking. So we managed to raise about 160,000 rands out of 300,000 rands, which we wanted to use to sustain the Lovedale 3 that we call, so that they're able to still take people through the space and be able to actually keep the space open, because it is in, I believe, a 1.6 million rands of debt, and it could close anytime. Upon getting there, we started realizing that, wow, this is insurmountable, from sales to marketing. And marketing is where we are trying to do our bit with the pop-up sales that we'll be doing in the major cities. But also what we learned is that if the space closes, the actual architecture of the space closes in its sad eventuality, it will be a sad day. How else do we embody this knowledge in the way that inspired me to keep it going? What then becomes this grand palace of knowledge? And I have always, coming from a place whereby I don't depend much on written knowledge, I depend on embodied, vocalized knowledges. I was like, hey, let's gather a community together and embody what I, Anelisa, and the Lovedale crew have experienced. So we did the call out for the Bodyland Residency. The Bodyland Residency is 8 brilliant, socially engaged artists who then went through a 2-day high intensity, high octane is our word for it, tour of the Kuma Valley, tracking the victory of this word from an empty space where the first words were written to when Zikana wrote one of his first sort of like rather than wars of subjugation. In the modern Lovedale, where we were asking ourselves while we were there, what do we do to embody Lovedale for the future coming? So the 8 artists have been working inspired by these various themes in all of the various mediums that they work in. And I'd like the opportunity to invoke them. Wezilin Gibe, who I believe showed last week here in Cape Town, in Grahamstown at the National Arts Festival, has been working around ideas of creating joy and love. The process of making work is the process of loving. And that is something that is quite fascinating to me, and also will be fascinating to the great population of Chime Valley. Also, we have Sky, who's a traditional instrumentalist, but finds new ways, new and interesting ways of creating these Xhosa instruments like Uhadi, Uaduka Davide, and all of that. And then we have Usisonke Papu, who is a healer and also a poet. So as you will notice, we have also Uloli, who wants to build a villa in Bondoland that will also be a house for modern art. So there's a very missionary thing about how I went about, or we went about, in creating the Bodyland institution, or the Bodyland residency. So we also then have Ukhangelani. Ukhangelani is from Ucentani, and he has the most amazing stories that are usually told vocally. But the great challenge he finds in his life is that he wants to put them in mural form in rural areas. And I feel that this is something that is really important, because truly, from me living in this, in a rural area, or making the decision to, I found that there's so much that we can do when we come from, I'm from around here. So coming back has been something fulfilling. So these various artists, they came together, and they are creating individually from this influence. And I'll invoke some of them as we go along, and answering questions and doing such. So at the moment, another thing that we found, we're also creating, layering on top of this 200 years of work by Lovedale. We are also on Victory of the Word digitally. We are starting conversations and building an ecosystem and documenting how this place that has such energy, in the sense that it's the Amatole Mountains, it's the Cume Valley, it's Alice, the basin. Much is happening. I know on one side, my neighbor Andile Gyalvani is also thinking of starting something whereby he'll be working with clay with people. Umtwakazi, who is a singer, has moved and she has also started taken over a school and is teaching art to young students. So it's Victory of the Word is not focused on just Lovedale. So it's highly influenced by Lovedale. We live to keep that 200-year archive alive. Not the archive at universities, but the one with the people. And I need to speak about the various ways in which the three have a stake in the archive that is at the University of Cape Town, and also have a stake at the Corrie Museum. It was during apartheid that those books were taken away from Alice for safekeeping, and they now need to be returned. The rights need to be paid by the SABC for the books, so that Lovedale can survive again. So if there's any lawyers around here who can help us with that kind of stuff, please join the ecosystem. There is much that we need to do, and an artist and a curator are powerful in the vision, but we do thoroughly need people who are going to put us in a place whereby we can put Ucebo, Bishop, Nobulelwa in a place to make work. Another way we're embodying it is the idea of digitization. Digitization is not only digitizing, but it is also something powerful in the sense that it is performance. You can perform. I grew up on radio dramas. My father used to write radio dramas as a part-time sports journalist and activist. And he used to use me as child's voices, and also as the person who walks on, but I think it's not a boom person, but there's something for the gaffer or whatever. And for me, I think that there's something so beautiful in asking the people of Alice, the young people of Alice, to reperform books that are so integral to their places. It's something so simple, but I have expertise in performance and visual arts. So I think that these things are things that we're working on with Anelisa, with our visions and all of that. And I think a big question to ask is, what is an archive without a building? What is, because I think it's a big question that happened afterwards, after the burning of the University of Cape Town one. We're like, okay, so what happens if the Great Xhosa Dictionary and the Great Xhosa Bible, which was printed in Alice at Lovedale and kept there for safekeeping behind wood fireproof doors. Wow, how inclusive. That's also another madness that we go through. We try and center this around the contemporary Lovedale, because the battle to get those works back will be quite interesting. And for them, the three, to actually be entitled to whatever happens to that archive. Yeah, I am I'm stuck for now. Shall we do an interim question?
Yeah, but I mean, can I maybe just respond and just add a little bit, or not add, but like respond to this incredibly rich project, you know, that you've presented to us, because I think there are a couple of words that stand out for me. The first word is invoke. You said invoke so many times, and it's about invoking people, both from the past and these people that you're bringing together through the residency. I love that word, you know, because it's really about paying homage. The other ideas, this idea of embodiment and layering and ecosystem, you know. So for me, you know, how does one begin to think of the building, which you haven't really described as the object, which, you know, we could get to or not, but I'm interested in the materiality of the building.
Mm.
But it's also not about that, you know. It's not about the building, but it's about how the building, you know, begins to inspire these spectral infrastructures, to borrow from Irit Rogoff and the collective on free thought. You know, spectral infrastructures is such an amazing way to think about, you know, there is this infrastructure that is longing to be rebuilt, potentially, or reimagined, but then it's also these other networks of infrastructures that come out of that through your residency, through thoughts around archive, you know, thinking about, I love that question. What is an archive without a building? And I think, in a way, the Lovedale project begins to offer an answer for that, which I'm completely, you know, in awe of, in a way, right? So for me, I'm interested. I've got a question around this idea of missionary. You said that this is a missionary project in a way, but I don't believe you, actually. Like, I want to understand exactly what you mean by that, because it's a very cheeky way to talk about a missionary project, right? So maybe could you talk a little bit about the methodology that you
Yeah.
are engaging with when you say this is a missionary project?
Mm. Well, it goes back to the word, it goes back to me being always facetious, of course. but,
Yeah, I got
but,
that. I got that.
but I think that it became a jargon
Yeah,
in when we
yeah,
speak within our board.
yeah.
But for example, Lovedale is founded by someone who thinks that they had a mission. Lovedale is kept going by people who feel that they had a mission.
Yes,
Even the Black newspaper pioneers, the liberation theologists, all of that, everyone felt that they had a missionary, they were
yes,
men of destiny,
yes,
you know?
yes.
And that that always makes my modernist mind just go like, okay, let's play with it.
Yeah, yeah.
But for me, I feel the idea, maybe my definition of missionary is then enters sideways, because
Mm,
I truly believe that once you take it upon yourself, or once you let go of the fear to teach and to learn,
mm,
you know, you then can be able to drop one thing on someone and like die, it expands. So maybe the methodology is that of a ripple.
yeah,
And the ripple is when one person becomes a convert and then the other person becomes a convert. And then you create this sort of like network or neural network of sorts, right? And
yeah.
I think that's how I take missionary. And yeah, I don't think I'm spreading I think that also, even from the victory of the word, I think the victory of the word, everyone always thinks is like a charismatic church that's opening in Randburg or something. But the victory of the word itself is the fact that the word has gone through so many disturbances. The
Yeah,
Black word, from the fact that as well, what is you're asking, there's a question that you were asking right now about the physicality of what maybe an archive or a library would be, or a press house would be, right? And then you asked a question of what I always ask the question of what is the what is the press or the building, the institution without a body. And it actually is our grandmother's stories, our
Yeah.
grandmothers or our great grandmothers, depending on how old we are. In the Sky, electricity came much later, so I was being told stories by not by the fireplace but by the candle. And these are embodied stories. These are embodied stories that Athi, with all his great education and access to white cubes, is able to slap on the walls and get a lot of money for. So there is also that on the side of what are we doing to the archive? Are we taking it away from that original point, which is basically your grandmother telling you a story, a moral tale, a tale about Joburg having big bad wolves or whatever, and then we're taking it to a place whereby even their talismanic powers are taken away. I speak of talismans, I speak of invocations, and maybe I find something that is maybe esoteric to me, but esoteric in how truly important it is for us to refine our languages, to find new and interesting ways of playing with them for our sake of our dignity.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not
Yeah.
even going to speak about inheritance, but inheritance is a big part of how lineage takes care of you, you
Yeah.
know?
I
Yeah.
think also there's a kind of a idea around missionary that could either be reformist and violent, like quite violently reformist, or
Mm,
emancipatory, right?
mm,
So I
mm.
think there's an idea here, you're playing with this methodology of the missionary, but in an emancipatory practice,
Yes.
that's why I love this project. An emancipatory
In a
project,
liberation theory kind of
exactly.
way, like in a,
Yeah,
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 and that's
yeah,
yeah, that's why networks are important rather than, islands or,
yeah.
these kinds of individualist modes. Networks is about, collectivity and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
if one thinks also like yeah, within the liberation struggle or whatever struggle, street committees would make things happen, you know, which
yeah.
is something I don't see anymore. But also I think that maybe that also then becomes this missionary, because in Kosovo always say, yo, nevangeli. If you have anything to say or politics or whatever to say, you have evangeli or an evangelical thing to speak
Sure,
out, whether it doesn't matter how secular it is or whatever, you know.
sure.
So yeah, it becomes that. Um, what was I going to say about I was going to actually speak to you once again, going to a visual thing and
Mm,
speak to you guys about the movement, just the architectural, the way the architecture of Lovedale changed.
mm,
So the first Cume mission, the one in 1823, you can go to the Cume mission now, still surrounded by old colonial houses. But when you look at that place where the first Xhosa words were written, you just see a square of our pine trees, because there was a whole compound that was created by those who settled in a missionary settlement. And you don't see anything. Nature has taken over. Some people find pieces of China, some people find pieces of, there are some, Brownlee was buried there with his wife, one of the first missionaries. So there is a graveyard of a British woman, a British child, and a British husband, and many others. It then gets burnt down during the War of the Axe. I think in Fazwe Kanxele, which is the Seventh Frontier War. And then it moves to Alice. Alice had military camps and it could be taken care of, but it also moves because of the evolution of Lovedale. So it moves inside Lovedale, the Lovedale Fort Hare compound. You know, it becomes part held close to the bosom, starts publishing and doing all of that. A fire happens, many fires happen, but a fire happens about 2 decades ago that then leads the present Lovedale people to move out. So part of the archive burned. A part of it was taken to Corey in Grahamstown roads, and then the other was taken to UCT. So there's this thing that's happening to both the building and the knowledge body, do you know what I mean? In the form of the archive. Yeah, and then also at the same time, they moved to a fruit and veg. But before the fruit and veg took over, it was a Lovedale compound as well. So they moved from the Lovedale yard to the middle of to the middle of Alice, whereby they were given land by the Lovedale Press, but the Lovedale College could not afford to keep the land. And yeah, a fruit and veg city bought the Lovedale building and now wants their money. So that's the evolution of the place. So you walk into the place, you see things shoved in one corner, you see bags of potatoes in another corner, in a space that is so rich in itself, because also that space that then became a fruit and veg place was probably in operation since the 60s, 50s, whatever. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. I mean, what I'm picking up is, Heinrich and I are very involved in the study of historic buildings, and often you are asked to like look at a timeline, like what is the biography of the building, right? And the biography of the building then dictates how we conserve the building, right? So, and which parts are valuable, which parts are not valuable. I'm talking about the materiality, the actual objects, right? And it's not it's not unique to buildings. Often other objects also get conserved in similar ways, paintings, things like that. But what I often get quite disparaged about is that so much of the rich history gets lost when we fixate on conserving the building. And what I'm seeing in this project is that yes, we have to look at the infrastructure, the materiality of the building, but you are also conserving other parts, like this idea that the archive moved, to other spaces, and the archive was part of people's stories, people's the social imagination. So those kind of parts of the narrative or the biography of the space actually gets reignited, together with the actual building. So what I'm just trying to offer to this conversation is that what I value in this project, that there is a kind of a sense that the richness of this project goes beyond the building itself, even though we have to take care of the building too, which I like about this project.
Yeah.
I think let me
So
see
with
if there are any questions.
oh, I wanted to add something that we've been doing. Just the building itself is in total disrepair because so much of debt is happening, right? And I really, really do want to encourage you. If you're passing by, go past it, Dikeni. Lovedale is a beautiful story of how people love a building that is holding books and nothing else.
Yeah.
It's something really powerful in that to behold. But also at the same time, with regards to the powerful things, that there's still like old printers, old London printers that we used, old presses that we used, gold embossing machines that only one person can use now. Ubaba Ubishop, who's 70 years old and has been working there for 40 years. So here's a master printer who's stuck in Alice with these machines that remind him of his skill, but he can't exercise it because of that. So we would love, as well, if we have any friends who can come in and do a workshop or a school, who knows how to work with Heidelberg's offsets, who knows how to work with sort of like old London printers, to come through and collect kids from Alice and just show them these things, because it's no use if they're not being beheld. And from then onwards, we can move on to doing art books, and all of those things. But it needs to be sparked in a young, and embodied by a young brain first. And that's where the materiality comes from. It's nothing if it's just an object. Because many objects, we have a history of many objects being kept behind doors. I don't care about a book, but I want access, because that heals so much already.
Yeah. Athi, there's a question I'm going to read from Amy von Witt. Hi, Athi. Thank you for this engaging talk. I grew up in Hogsback and have strong connections.
Homies.
Have strong connections to the space and place. I'm interested in this conversation around missionaries within the liberation struggle and what happens to archives now. Could you speak a bit more about the relationship between the press and oppression with censorship/propaganda? And building on that, how do we decide what books are to be reperformed and when to tell new stories from the area? Oh, you're on mute, huh?
I am on mute now. I love how it tells you. Wow. I think that there is a tension in all publications to present a certain voice. Lovedale is founded by missionaries, thereby they had to also publish and send out images and pictures to the Glasgow Missionary Society in London. So that was a different way of censoring. It was self-censoring, so that you could present a certain view of the heathen or the native or whatever, or the student becoming a heathen becoming a student, or can they backslide or whatever. Those are the first conversations that were being had with regards by the missionaries. And then the second generation comes, the Sogas, who studied theology, the Chatus and everyone, right, who studied theology. But there's a man called James Stewart, who's of course the head editor, the white missionary, and what of that. And we need Usom Glada, that's his Xhosa name. That's how integrated into the philology and making of the Xhosa language he is. And there's much that can be explored about what is the Xhosa language, you know, because I'm Patra and my language is ancestrally different from that, but I speak Xhosa. But with that as well, Stewart releases a book called, it's in Xhosa, but it reminds me of Vasari's Lives of Artists, but it's written about lives of great people in the Valley. And many women were actually written out of that book. I invoked Nontsizi Mgqetho. I invoked Uti Soga, who had a sister as well, who I'll put the name when I remember it. But she went to London, was an academic, and came back and became a school teacher and a nurse and all of that. So it's very interesting that throughout history, there's been this omission of femme people from history, from it. And then now we're picking up the Zora Fuchane, who I'm learning about right now, who is producing work at the same time as Zora T, you know? So I'm very, very, very fascinated by that. And also stories that come out from the 30s, 40s, 50s about how the femme experience happens, because that is me now starting to think of how we can queer the archive, how we can femme the archive, how we can black the archive. And by black, I mean non-church going black. Sure. Because yeah, that's the place that we come from, in which we can improve upon this beautiful archive that we have, right? How is present? Well, right now, wow, we have post 94. How many times have we threatened editors, guys? And it's not, I don't see missionaries doing that, but I see people who have been led and have minds of sheep, like the great Lord's flock, when it comes to receiving information. I don't think that publishing a penis of a president in a painting warrants a boycott of the press. And we need to ask ourselves, through this history of Lovedale, what actually happens today with how we react to print, how we react to real information. We speak of decolonialism. I tend to have I don't have a problem with it, but I find it to be, you have to pay a lot of school fees to know about it. Do you know what I mean? But for me, Ibuyambo is something that my uncle taught me about. Can you see, once again, I love going back to the source of the story. Yeah. And Ibuyambo is a return to Ambo, where things were forgotten, where things were omitted, where we felt too good to learn about certain things. That then colonialism, it feels like I'm removing something from my colon or scabbing myself or whatever. And that is not something that interests me. I'm sure, good luck. But yeah, so, and building on that, how do you decide that books, which ones we want to reperform all of them, man? So next month, we will be starting to sell them. So we'll be releasing them one by one, where I'll either be doing a reading or we'll invite someone to come and do a reading. Can you see, once again, we're planting things inside of people so that they can disseminate it. So we'll be inviting people to come do readings, to do reviews of the books. Also at the same time to negotiate new and contemporary ways of approaching certain things. There's one book that I am working with at the moment, so that I'm able to sort of like mention some parts of it for reperforming. It's Ingqumbo Yeminyanya, The Wrath of the Ancestors. I believe it was written in the 40s, end of World War II. And it is about Unobantu It's a moral tale, but a moral tale that is so tricky. It's about Unobantu, who's educated at Fort Hare and Lovedale, who then becomes a queen of Amampondomise, but she doesn't take the traditions. And in not taking the traditions, she gives birth to the prince. And then afterwards, she beats the snake that's supposed to be holy in this family. Because of her education, she gets mad, she loses her mind, and kills herself, the child. And I think the third person, the cousin of the king, who would become something if in the case of the king dying. So the fact that they hang, this story is so important because it has always cast a light on the bad girl, the girl who goes to university, the girl who has secular knowledge on things, the girl who can laugh at some really magical things, you know? I would like to bring that back by asking maybe it was postpartum depression that got her to such a point, because the succession of stories is not, oh, the gods, the wrath of the ancestors are the ones that made you go mad. But also there's such a powerful thing about the wrath of the ancestors, especially with last week, especially with Marikana, with all these things that we do amongst each other as Black people. I think it's a revisitation. The body remembers, but it's also a revisitation of a wrath of sorts. I don't know how we're going to clean that up, but can you see the way in which you can approach just one title of a book to try and make it more contemporary, to try and make it ask the tough questions? There's another one called Buzani Kubao, which is about arranged marriages, which also leads to mental depression. There's a very Fanonian thing about psychosis that happens in these books that come out of Lovedale, especially from 1920 onwards, you know. Also in the 90s, Lovedale books start speaking of AIDS and underage sex. And those are the ones that then got lost in the textbook crises and all of that. I'm sorry, I just need to open for my poor dog. He's trapped with me, Mr. August.
No problem.
Okay. Boys, go to Uncle Mali. Okay. Oh, I'm not. Oh, whoa. Damn, I'm not on mute. Okay. Yeah. So that's the thing. Also, there's books that have been written today by Xhosa people. I'd like to invoke Atambile Masola, Dr. Atambile Masola, who is releasing a book, Ilifa, Inheritance. Yeah, so it's a beautiful, we are living in ecosystems as well, whereby we are supporting each other, you know, where we're like, okay, come to my site and we come to my Instagram page, we'll have a conversation about this aspect of it. And then I'll go to another person's page and then I'll have an aspect that is more relevant to them, you know? So, but I think it's the autonomy, the fact that we are doing it willfully and we're doing it with much great sacrifice, that we are upending the whole idea of missionary and also the dictating and all of that. I also need to mention that Lovedale Press, when they made textbooks, they were not part of the state apparatus. They were part of the Ciskei government. Although it was in itself a state apparatus, but it was working along the Xhosa nationalistic lines. So its push was really to uncover these things and not have them as sort of like Via Africa, Town Force Laws Via Africa, which was also books that were meant for the Black person to parrot and not actually comprehend. So there's a dignity that is in these books that is not in any other language books from the ones that were the tools of apartheid. So I think that answers a lot about censorship, the mission that people have, because yeah, I have an agenda as well with regards to this. You know, we all have an agenda with regards to this. Preserving language means that it can be bust open. Taboos can be brought out because a taboo in English doesn't hit the same as the taboo in Xhosa. And that is just, yeah, that's just the way it is. It's a matter of upbringing. I see Hanish.
Yes, Hanif has joined us.
Oh, hi, Hanish.
Athi, I think that, you know, for me, there's also a sense that this project has got no geographical boundaries, right? In the way that you've now imagined it, you know? And I always think that architecture and space somehow always ends up making walls, right? And I have a conversation, I've had a conversation with a friend of mine about how can we construct spaces that doesn't actually make walls that, enclose. And this is something that is linked to what Ola said yesterday as well, around enclosure, limitlessness, and boundlessness, and the ground. She had this beautiful ideas around reimagining spatial practice in those ways. And I'm just thinking, do you see it in the same way as a kind of a geographical boundlessness, but is also at the same time quite rooted in this, the previous Ciskei and, the Eastern Cape, and the language of the locale. So how, yeah, so I'm just interested to hear what you and maybe others in this forum think around that idea, Um,
I think that then goes to the idea of I've always been one who does believe that I'm walking through the earth to test my, say, autonomous body against sort of like sovereign state of things or states of being, whether it is an actual building like the South African National Gallery building, which historically did not accept people like me, but now does. So it's working with body and architecture, but also at the same time, we do come from a history whereby in East London, or I grew up in East London, I did not stay in East London. It's a brain drain, Eastern Cape, because of how it has always been, actually. Like even, yeah, industrial times or whatever, it's always been a place where people move in, whether it's the Bata people moving in, the Hlubi, the Mfengu, the whatever, or there's always movement. But its citizens always have the best way to survive or be great is to move, or to be of influence is to move out. Nelson Mandela did it. Why can't I? So I did it too. So it's like that history of just brain drain. A big decision that we made was to center it in the Eastern Cape, to really not be like in Cape Town going like, oh, we're working for Lovedale, and doing that. No. And also for the artists who then become the manifestation of this word that is so important to us, and how the sustainability of the Lovedale project or Lovedale is that of body land. We name countries land. We have Switzerland, I'm in Xhosa land or Nika land, there's Zulu land, there's Swaziland, there's whatever land. And this is nationalism, this is body nationalism, in the sense that you're using a language or a culture or a nationalism of sorts to mark a place. But body land is like you are saying this is the land, and you take responsibility for it. You uncover, you even go to a place whereby you're unscabbing yourself. But body land for me is about these artists, about people who've been displaced, about people who cannot be let into spaces historically or ethically or religiously or whatever to find their space. So it's about occupying yourself, decorating yourself decorating yourself with the land. You know what I mean? One of the big pushes that we had when I was doing sketching and drawing classes with because we took it there. I was like, I never see many Black landscape artists. Let's sit here and draw the landscape, because the act of drawing the landscape is an act of charting it. Hello, Pirniev. That is why Pirniev probably did not put any people in the land, and then we also had a beautiful conversation about how Pirniev how like Khoisan paintings or like paintings by Abatwa Makakantu and everyone, right? Were just people in space, and the land was actually the rock it was painted on. And then you go over this rainbow whereby you get this dude in like the early 21st century or 20th century who just totally removes people, even the fauna sometimes, So I'm fascinated by how South Africa, I like to think of things in that big scale and then find myself in the middle of those things. So that's the body land idea as well. We're just a couple of hours away from Kraftwerk. Would love to partner up with some people that side.
It's really great. Are there any questions from the participants? Any more questions? Any burning statements? I mean, we could go on for, I can go on for days talking to you about this. So powerful, so profound, and so thoughtful. I mean, I think the idea of Bodyland really comes out of your practice as a performance artist,
Yes.
One of the most important projects that I've certainly seen in Cape Town was the work that you did at the Long Street Baths, you know, and that's
Yes.
why I respect you so much as a spatial practitioner, because of your transformation of spaces that we know, you know, like the Long Street Baths, and how you reimagined the, you know, the project that you did, the gallery project that we did, that we saw, where you just imagined a new nation, you know. It's like, let's do that, you
Mm,
know, through a
mm,
geographical gaze. So I think that, you know, the fact that you're so, you know, committed to performance art through your own body makes you a very powerful spatial practitioner.
mm.
Um, okay, so
I broke a leg, so I will not be performing. I actually had a reconstructive surgery on my right knee.
oh my God.
And I've been fascinated by the idea of performance. Um, I love the fact that I love a performance that's outside in public spaces.
Yes.
I love the transgression. All
Mm,
performance should have transgression, but I love the transgression of performing in Cape Town. It's actually
mm,
even better than performing in Europe. It's
mm,
like, you know, there's this tension in the
mm,
architecture, this tension in the spaces, and how you meander around, both in CVs and in costume. Do I find a body land in Cape Town? I think the reason why I enjoy performing in public spaces in Cape Town is that I'm still looking for my body in Cape Town.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
how it fits into everything. Because I'm in East London now. I'm an Eastern Caper, and I love Cape Town. Cape Town has been home. I work in Diapangela, I work in Cape Town, but there's this displacement and this history of displacement that makes you just, and then you start seeing these old sort of like road statues that are still around and not in graveyards, and this argument about how do we memorize body land, who do I memorize in these places, and then the contradiction of having a roads or Jan Smuts or whatever, then makes me feel disappointed about being here. I get traumatic stress disorder, like when I run down a company gardens. I have to spit when I go past that statue. I really have to, in my spandex and all. But it is a displacement. I don't know if it's a psychological or a genetic memory one or whatever. And I think that COVID hit, and then we not started seeing, but it became official that this place does not want us here. And that is what I felt. And it's great that it happened a couple of months after Mali and I bought property in the Eastern Cape, that we had always had the dream of turning into a residency exhibition space, whereby in a space that an island, because structurally as well, where the Bodyland Institute is where the hammers are hitting right now, is a mountain called Hogsback. It's a mountain that was owned by the Nika people, but they were displaced. And on top of this mountain, then the people who settled onto it were the missionaries, people who were teaching at Lovedale, teaching at Fort Hare and whatever. And within that, there was also an ecological change, because from grasslands, it became little country gardens with azaleas and roses and whatever. So there's much displacements that we can speak of. And I think that COVID has brought the idea of dignity, which is at the center of our motto, to great glaringness, to such an extent that these books, literally, the press became my home. You know, I went back to probably like that boy in high school again, who would go and read instead of face the real world or the traumas of the real world. So I think that the whole world is hurting, and I would like to offer Victory of the Word to be that space whereby we can all just find solace in books,
Yeah.
you know, and the power of them to for us to think in multimedia senses, in transdisciplinary ways, to always be moving and to
Mm,
pick up things. I love the image you're using for the winter school, because it brings me back to the makeup, the Xhosa word for hogsback
mm,
is qabimbola.
yeah.
Qabimbola is an instruction for one to take clay and smear it on their bodies.
Yeah.
And this is so important because it speaks of who the land belongs to. It also speaks, because we used it for painting, for clothes dyeing, for actual spreading on the body, because you get them in different tones, in white and brown and red as well. And also we had to go out to actually go find them and look for them, because that means that you have to be in touch with the community and the people who actually can lead you to these things, you know, and you become a bit of a pioneer. I don't know. But yeah, we're really working with our, like, for me, I want to work with that material. I want to start painting in clay. I want to start working with New Den Paints, who do Matubula. They have a factory just down the road. I'm fascinated as an artist, but also as the one half of a victory of the word, as to how we can create more body lands. This one was like multidisciplinary artists. I know that next time we think of like 3 rivers, the Cat River, where the Cat River Rebellion happened. One of the most victorious stories of the Khoisan people, or one of the first and probably one of the few that I've heard of, like Khoisan people freed slaves and Xhosa people freed Zulu refugees coming together and winning and holding a fort for days, for months, actually. Yeah. So I'm fascinated by that and that unpicking. And I think I'm talking everyone's ear off. I'm not seeing questions.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Can tell me, I'm sorry I arrived late. We were doing something else in India. But I want to ask a very architectural question to a non-architect, expecting a very strange answer. And that is knowing some of your work well and being fascinated by what you're saying. So on the one hand, you're talking about this clay that goes onto the body. That clay belongs to no one. It has the practice of putting it on your body has a history, but the clay itself has no ownership and no history in itself. Then I think of your work as an artist and this thing of imagining an entire world and in dress and outfit, everything. So there's an outfit. It's more substantial than the clay. It is imagined in a much deeper, thicker way, as if it is real, with entourage and animals and furniture and islands and all sorts of things. It's this whole world you're making, but it's a thing entirely of your imagination. Then there's the Lovedale Press, which is a building. And this is where the architectural intrigue comes in. And it has a very real history. Unlike the clay, you cannot wash that history off. It doesn't dissolve. You can't put it in water and dissolves and put it on another body. It is just that thing. And it's this intrigue between the world of the imagination, where you can free yourself and make your own island and your own outfit and be yourself on your own terms. And the other one is having to inhabit inherited worlds. And I'm interested in your take on that tension, because part of being a South African today is this problem of the inherited world. We would love to just make our own island. And as artists, can. As architects, we always sit with this thing, there is no neutral terrain. It's not like I can pick up the mud and it's nobody's mud. It always was somebody's. There's always something that happened there. Whether it is of huge social consequence, of lesser consequence, but it's never nothing. It's always there. And I'm interested in your take on, one is inventing your own islands and your own worlds, to not being able to invent it, having to be restricted, and negotiate those two worlds.
There's one word I seldom use, which is restriction. It's just something I've trained myself. If you think it, you can do it. And that's silly, but I'm a fool like that. It's all about going deeper in you, or revealing yourself, like stripping a cabbage. Do you know what I mean? It's those things. So for me, the more clothes I wear is to make something opaque, with the goal of you as an audience member going deeper inside of a story. Because art is seeking. I can't give you everything. I can give you a world that I've imagined. But I don't know if you can go into that world. I can give you sacred entry points to it, but I don't know if you can cross the threshold and go in. However, when it comes to the idea of now being fascinated by the Bodyland Institute using things that are around, let me go back to probably my performance practice. I do know for sure that it is very, it's an urban area. That's what sets it apart as well. It's an urban area in a post-industrial, post-globalized world, whereby I can get material for dirt cheap, but also that material is a window to worlds because of where they come from, you know? I love scaling buildings, climbing them even. And for me, that is literally, especially I did a performance whereby I climbed churches.
Yeah.
And one specifically, which is the Universal Church of Christ. And that was literally you testing your body against a structure, testing yourself against a scaled building, or testing yourself against the idea of Christianity, patriarchy, or reverence, you know, while speaking about a body that is femme at the same time doing this. So there's much that I can communicate there. It's 15 years of building a language. And then with Lovedale is 200 years of a language that I have borrowed tools to somehow be able to navigate. The idea of regionalist art, I love it. To be able to just pack away from the city and take your traumas and go blom on a mountain somewhere. The Flaherty seminars, which I did last week, also was something like that, where you just go up a mountain. I think there's one in America that gave birth to sort of like the pop artists or something. Rauschenberg went there. I don't know what it's called. I'll remember that.
The Black Mountain College.
I think so.
Yes. You know,
yeah. And I'm fast. Bodyland has those aspirations whereby we want to. And Flaherty as well. Like, so we work around sort of like creating wayward institutions, you know, where it's like, hey, man, are you really going to call it an institution? Like, hey, there's no better word for now, but we totally do it different, you know. But I believe in institutionalizing our friends, institutionalizing moments, our mothers, all of that. So when I talk of institution again, I'm being facetious. I want to take those who were locked out because of finances, because of language, because of whatever, and somehow kick those doors down by creating Bodyland. And the products in Bodyland are the residency. We are building a costume from scratch. We're working with women here in Alice and the Kume Valley as well on basically rebuilding and doing an intervention on old ethnographic takes on costume, because also Dugan Cronin, Barbara Tyrrell, all those people have had an influence in what we call Xhosa clothing. And I would love the language around that archive to be something, because that is body and land, right? That is costume and how we adorn these imaginaries of ourselves. And the body is an imaginarium. You know, if you can work it out and restrict your diet or whatever you want to do with it, you know, it can really do a lot for you. Yeah, so that's where I'm at with answering that question, but I'm not satisfied with the way I answered it.
Yeah.
And that's what also Bodyland is about, because the work is answering the question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, buildings are a prosthesis like a coat is. It's just made out of harder material that lasts longer. It's like the mud doesn't last very long on your body. A coat lasts longer and a building lasts much longer. And because it lasts longer, it absorbs meaning and it absorbs purposes of previous generations, but it also makes it open to being reinterpreted and re-owned. You know, like a coat could be owned by one person and then be passed on. Where the mud is very hard, if you put it on your body, it's very hard to put it on another body. You know, the mud doesn't transfer. A coat can transfer, but a building transfers very easily, but it then has this residue of the previous ownerships. And it's what makes it an interesting cultural artifact. Because you're not always the originator of it. You're the sort of current owner.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by the two things that you're speaking of with regards to continue that, because I spoke earlier about a great fire that happened at Lovedale when it was still inside of the Lovedale College. And that was probably like a building that comes from the late 1800s that burnt, and part of their archive and manuscripts up. And this resulted in this move to Corrie and things along with apartheid. So I think that is a dematerialization of something, of an archive and also of a building through a fire. So after years, it stood for years burnt, while the Lovedale presses had moved to town, to another Lovedale building. However, the one that was left behind burnt was then refixed, and it became a mortuary.
Wow. Wow.
So I think I'm with you with regards to how things can move and a narrative can develop in the bibliography of a story, right? But then at the same time, there is there's also this, like there's what you're saying about clay. One of the wars, because there were about 10 wars or 100 years of wars between the Xhosa, the Dutch East India Company, and also the British and the Afrikaans. There's a story of a beginning of one of the battles whereby the British, oh no, Xhosa women, as they usually did, they would go and get clay. The clay would be used for writing, for graphics that were actually on their houses as form of communication. So it's philology, it's glyphs. The house can itself be a way of communicating status and everything. The body is done in markings. So that is a way of writing. Women are transferring stories about each other, about femininity, because when they rub each other, they rub each other. Mixed with fat, you can rub it on a dude too, as a form of communicating love or whatever, you know? So the British guys started a war by just setting off a cannon in one of the pits that were actually where all these Xhosa women and children would go and take the thing, the clay for all these various economies, because it's an economy. It's a material. So I'm fascinated by you speaking about the ownership of it. Once it's on the body, you cannot take it off and put it on another body. But there was a time in which the actual material then became private farms. The actual site of this battle is a private farm of a friend of Madhu's. So so the ownership then goes back to this idea of like, I'm listening to you speaking about this clay, and I'm like, yes, there was a war that was sparked out because of clay. So once again, the material needs demystifying, or maybe I need to demystify it in my head, but Inner Bodyland would come and ask maybe someone who works with rocks and clay to come and talk about the geology of this place, because it is fascinating. Because it's not only about art and the written word, it's about ecology. Dams were built over actual villages with memories, you know, like the Aswan Dam happened. Bridal Drift Dam happened as well. So it's those various things that then make it a complicated thing that can be unpicked in a very somatic, soulful, generative way, instead of living in an archive.
In an emancipatory way, liberatory way, you know. So
Yeah.
we've run out of time, although I feel like we can talk for days about this. But maybe in closing, I just would like to thank you for putting this project out into the world. I mean, geez, it's incredible. And obviously, it goes without saying that we as a practice support this in every way. You know, we're going to be coming to the Eastern Cape soon and offering whatever service you need to support this ecology. We want to be part of this ecology, you know, that you're speaking about. I'm part of this collaborative work. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for everybody for attending. Um, the talk is recorded and will be available afterwards for people to look back. I think it's a beautiful record in itself to keep and to spread. Um, so thank you very much. You know, that was a beautiful offering. Just a reminder to everybody that on Thursday, 4 p.m., we will have another incredible speaker hailing from Palestine, a artist and architect called Vivian Sansor, who will extend this, you know, conversation that we've had both with Ola and with Athi around ecologies, resistance, you know, enclosures, non-enclosures, liberatory practices, but in the very particular context of Palestine. So please follow the links, the National Arts Festival links to register for that talk, which will conclude our winter school, our first winter school. And thank you for being part of the first one.
Thank you. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank you two. And then also thank the National Arts Festival. Yes, thank you for overcoming, and thank you for being able to deliver yet another powerful season. And I'd like to thank the people who came in and listened to this. And
Thank you.
of course, I'm on Instagram. We're on Instagram. Victory of the Word is on Instagram. Let's create ecosystems.
Yeah.
Let's spread the word. Not missionary style, but maybe in a bigger and better way.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Keep going.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.